Two big things. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik as Ohio State heads into week 3 against Ohio to close out its non-conference schedule. And it's also the second of two games where it was essentially pick your score. You play Texas, which was going to be competitive, and now you got two games where you can pick your score. Though Ohio will put up a bigger fight than what Grambling put up. And that's with all due respect to Grambling. I think they threw their best punches. It's just that was such a talent gap that it was never, ever going to be close. But that's typical. Every Tuesday, Stefan and I come on here ahead of Ryan Day, talking ahead of the week, and just talk about what we're interested in, what we want to ask Ryan Day about this week. The schedule's not out as we're recording this, but hopefully we get some coordinators as well. But Stefan, what's on your mind this week as Ohio State heads into its last week of non-conference play?
I'm curious what Ryan Day thinks about how this schedule is kind of shaped up for Ohio State. Because week 1, we've said it so many times on Buckeye Talk, it kind of felt like the final game of the 2024 season, where like a lot of the guys who play, had somewhat of a role, in last season's team. You wanted as much experience possible to be on the field that game, and then you were going to kind of almost restart your training camp, the next 3 weeks. And it's set up in this way where it went, boom, top 3 matchup, see what you got with the guys who are expected to have the biggest roles. The following week, we see everyone get on the field against Grambling. And now it's like another small step up in competition, probably actually a pretty big step up in competition, but still a wide margin between Ohio State and its opponent, where you're taking a step up and now the reigning MAC champion is coming to Ohio Stadium. And then you have a bye week to kind of assess it all. Like, does Ryan Day like how the schedule is set up where it's immediately a punch thrown at you, and then a few weeks of a gradual incline, and then you have a bye week to kind of assess it all before you go in to your Big Ten opener? So I want to know, what does he think of how the schedule played out? Because as Ohio State looks ahead, in the following years, they've got home and homes with Alabama and Georgia, and some of those games are week 2, some of those games are week 3. Like, what does he think of kind of the way this schedule is shaped up, and does he like the early punch, or would he rather play a game like Texas in a week 3 or week 4? That's what kind of interests me, because it's been such an interesting experiment of like learning what this Ohio State team is. Because week 1, I think we learned, okay, Julian Sain's ready for the spotlight. Jeremiah Smith is still really good. Carnell Tate is still really good. Guys like Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Jermaine Matthews, Davis Ignos, and a guy like Jermaine Matthews is stepping into a bigger role, but I think we had an idea of what he could be, right? Like Edric Houston, Katie McDonald, stepping into bigger roles. We have an idea of what they'd be. And then, the next 3 weeks or the next 2 games, and then plus the bye week, kind of gave you an opportunity to see, okay, who are the guys who are going to factor in? Who are the guys that are going to be rotating? Who are the guys that, if there's an injury, you trust them to step up and be in bigger roles? A guy like Devin Sanchez has emerged, in that light. So it's just interesting how this schedule is shaped up. And I'm curious what Ryan Day thinks about it and how much he feels like he's been able to learn about this team as they've kind of gone through this, a bit of a roller coaster of a schedule the first 3 weeks.
And the perspective one is going to be interesting because he hasn't lost that early season non-conference major game yet, right? Urban Meyer lost to – well, no, that's not true. Ryan Day lost in 21 to Oregon, but he's won the last 2 times with Notre Dame at home first week of the season, Texas at home first week of the season. They beat Notre Dame on the road in 2023. So he's 3-1, if my math is right. 2-1. I suck at math. We know this. 2-1 in these. No, 3-1. I was right. Gotta trust yourself sometimes, man. Go with your initial gut answer. 3-1 in these non-conference early season. We gotta have it games, and so it's gonna be interesting to see what his perspective on that is going to be. He's obviously gonna say, "Well, we won it, so I love it all the time. I want to play them all the time." But there's a perspective there from how you approach the regular season going forward, how you approached your off season leading up to that game versus. What if that game was this week and we had spent 2 weeks watching them play Grambling in Ohio? So I here's what I'm wondering, but I also have to tell people what my question is going to be because, listen, I'm writing a feature story on Will Kacmarek, and I'm using Will Kacmarek this week because they're playing Ohio to tell a bigger story about that 2021 recruiting class, which a lot of that was done remote because we were still stuck in COVID. And I'm just wondering, Stefan, since you've been here now, you see the whole operation, right? You see what happens in June with the official visits and the day camps and all those things and kids coming in for spring practice to watch those things. There's an evaluation process. And with a guy like Will Kacmarek, who didn't have a lot of offers, in fact, I think he had like 2 or 3 coming out of school, did that impact his recruitment? But from the Ohio State perspective, how did that impact the evaluation of players across the country when you know Jack Sawyer was going to be a Buckeye. He's a highly rated recruit. JT Tuimoloau is going to be a highly rated recruit. But when you're talking about guys who were in the 400s and the 300s and the 500s, when you're looking for those hidden gems, was it more difficult to find those guys when you're not on the road recruiting, when guys can't come to the camps and kind of pique your interest in those times? So that's the thing I have to ask. The thing I'm actually wondering about is the running back rotation. From what we saw from Bo Jackson, how do you taper that with you're playing Grambling, right? It's not like Bo Jackson ran it 9 times for 102 yards against Texas, and maybe he does that this week, maybe he doesn't, right? But it's a significant step back from where James Peoples had to make his debut, CJ Donaldson had to make his debut, and even when you take out that 51-yard run, he and James Peoples' numbers are equal. They're the exact same statistics. So watching the film, having conversations with Carlos Loughlin, trying to figure out how you want that running back rotation to work. Do you start to push Bo Jackson even more, and this becomes a 3-man thing by the time we get deep in the Big Ten play? Just the evaluation of what you saw from Bo Jackson, what you've seen from him in the spring, what you've seen from him in the fall, and do you think this can get to a situation where there are 3 guys carrying the load instead of 2, because they all 3 give you something very, very different depending on who you're playing this year?
Yeah, I think it's hard to watch that Grambling game and not think that Bo Jackson has somewhat of a role for this team because of that explosiveness. And I think another element to this is, I think there is importance to Bo Jackson getting some serious playing time this year because he's going to be a key part of the running back rotation next year. And who's to say that, if your top 2 running backs next year are James Peoples and Bo Jackson, you don't have to be married to the idea of James Peoples being RB1 just because he's a year more experienced, right? So, could Bo Jackson be your best running back next year? Like, the more reps you can get him this year, the more you can kind of get answers for 2025 and maybe behind the scenes be getting answers for 2026 or along the way be getting answers for 2026. So, yeah, the running back rotation is very interesting to me because Carlos Loughlin has made it clear that this doesn't have to just be a 2-man rotation, right? It's easy to do a 2-man rotation when Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are 5-star guys who are going to go early in the second round, right? Like, what you got there, you can put it on those 2 guys. And they've also been around, right? Like, James Peoples hasn't done this yet. Quinshon and Travion had done it, so you could trust them. Whereas this year, I don't know if you have a guy like that, right? Like, CJ Donaldson probably has some NFL prospects. I don't know if he's going in the second round. James Peoples, Bo Jackson, we'll see what they are down the line as prospects. But in terms of talent, you probably are below where you were last year, and you're kind of trying to figure that out. And if there's a third guy that factors into that, why not? Why not a guy like Bo Jackson factoring into it? I'm a big fan of his, and I agree with your Will Kacmarek thing is interesting because talking about the running backs, I'm thinking about a guy like Quinshon Judkins who he was in the 2022 class, not the 21 class, but he's another guy who through the COVID process nobody really knew who he was. He ends up at Ole Miss because Lane Kiffin was kind of the only coach who was looking at him intensely. And again, not being able to do visits and things like that, in his junior and senior years of high school made it a bit more difficult to get recognized. And within, 4 games of his freshman career at Ole Miss, everyone around the country is like, whoa, this dude might be the best running back in the SEC. This dude might be the best running back in the country. And then, 2 years down the road, he ends up at a place like Ohio State. And when that COVID stuff was going on, in terms of the restrictions for recruiting, a school like Ohio State was never going to find Quinshon Judkins, right? No. Like, this is a lowly rated kid in Alabama. He's probably going to stay in SEC country. Like, why spend many resources? And then 2 years down the road, you're like, whoa, that dude could be one of our running backs on a championship winning team. So that like era of recruiting that I think we're kind of at maybe the back end now, because a lot of those guys are juniors and seniors at this point in their collegiate careers. It is interesting watching it pan out. And I think it's why these maybe last 2 portal classes have had a lot of dudes who have like made an instant impact and changed some teams and really impacted some teams. And it's like, whoa, where did that guy come from? Like you said, diamond in the rough. Like, I mean, yeah, he wasn't being recruited because what can you tell about a guy when he's running on a Zoom camera for you or something like that, So there's only so much you can do. And, a guy like Will Kacmarek is probably an example of that.
And it kind of can shape a little bit of how Ohio State might approach some things going forward. As Ryan Day said, the evaluation part might be more important. Well, you've kind of had to do it a little bit in the past because that's all you could rely on. You couldn't really rely on, as you said, you can't tell how fast a guy's going through a Zoom screen. So the impact of that means Will Kacmarek has to go to Ohio to start off his career. But now, 4 years later here he is as a fifth-year senior at Ohio State, and he might be their best tight end and might be the most impactful tight end for what they want to do. Already making big plays this season. Sit the text 614-350-3315. Those are what we're thinking about asking Ryan Day as we're in the Woody today, asking him those questions. We're bringing it right to your phone before anywhere else. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Those are two big things ahead of Ohio State's game against Ohio on Saturday to close out the non-conference schedule. That's Stefan. I'm Steven. Go listen to Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts. We do very much longer versions of what we just did today. See you later.